You can help your students become more independent learners and help them remember the content that you're teaching them. By teaching all students how to be good learners and giving them the memory skills, you can help everyone. So let's start by thinking about your own memory process. So I'm going to show you a slide in a minute with 30 different items on it. You only have 1 minute. Memorize as many as you can and pay attention to what you're doing to try to remember. Ready? Go. Okay, stop. Now get a piece of paper out, stop the video, and write down as many of the things as you can. Welcome back. Did you remember all 30 items? Let's look. Check over your list. What did you remember? What did you forget? If you forgot some of the items, why do you think you forgot them? Now let's talk about your memory and how it works. You have what we call an M space, your short-term memory. You have 3 to 18 seconds to remember something. So when someone introduces you and you think about that name, if you don't decide to remember, you'll lose it within 18 seconds. Now your short-term memory, you can hold 7 to 9 items in your short-term memory. So if you're 15 or older, that's the general rule of 7 to 9 items. If you're teaching 5-year-olds, they can remember 2 items, plus or minus 2. So each of these is plus or minus 2. So that's your short-term memory. Now how does memory work? Let's talk about your brain. Well, the inner part of your brain, the limbic system, is the part that keeps control of your attention. So this is where your short-term memory comes in. All of your senses go into this area, so everything that you see, hear, feel, touch, and smell, taste comes in there. Now this limbic system decides what to pay attention to because you have thousands of senses and things coming into your brain at all times. So this is the gatekeeper. Now the hippocampus in your brain is the memory function, and the amygdala is in charge of emotions. And that's why safety is important here. If you feel threatened, then you're going to be paying attention to different things and maybe not to the things that you need to remember. So it's important to know this about the inner brain, that you need to feel safe, you need your students to feel safe, and you have to help them control that attention. And that's why we learned about attention control earlier. Now let's look at the neocortex, the outer part of the brain. This is where the long-term memories reside. This part of the brain likes novelty, whereas the limbic system really liked routines and safety. In order to remember for a long period of time, then we need to have novel and unusual things. This is the part of the brain that you use for problem solving, decision making, critical thinking, creative thinking. And the frontal lobe is the part that really develops last. And then this develops from the age of 12 to 21. So that's why we need to give our students, especially in middle and high school, lots of practice so that they can develop this part of their brain. So what does that have to do with memory? Well, let's take a look at some strategies and we'll refer back to these things. Here's one strategy: beginning, endings, middles. We remember beginnings and endings more than we remember middles. So when you're introducing information to your students, instead of one 20-minute session, you might want to break that down into 2 or 3 shorter sessions with short breaks. The break can be something very short, like turn to your neighbor and say, with a think, pair, share. It can be get up and stretch. It can be something very quick, but these little short breaks will help them remember because now we have 1, 2, 3 beginnings and 1, 2, 3 endings instead of one beginning and one ending. So that's one strategy that you can use in your classroom and teach your students when they're studying to take these short breaks. Another strategy is this 1-1-1-1. This is a review strategy. You can increase your memory by 266% by using this strategy. And that is, when you're studying, review after 1 hour. So we have a chunk of information that you're memorizing. After 1 hour, review that information again the next day, the next week, and the next month. And what they found through this research is that after 24 hours without review, we can only remember about 30% of what we're studying. But if we use this 1-1-1-1 method, we can remember up to 80% after 6 months with that review. So using this with your students and teaching them how to use it can really help them remember all the way to that final exam at the end of the year, and hopefully forever. You're going to use this technique when you want them to remember what you're teaching them for a long time. Now, what are some other strategies that you may have used when you were trying to remember those 30 items? I bet that many of you used grouping or categorizing, and we call it chunking, where you organize information into categories, and then you can remember more things. Now remember, you could remember 7 to 9 items. Well, what if it's 7 to 9 categories, and each one of those categories had 7 to 9 items? Now we can increase how many things we can remember. And by actually deciding on what the categories are, this actively stores information into our memory. Now, you may not be aware of this, but we don't just have one memory. We have 5 memories. And the more memories you put information in, the more likely it is you're going to be able to get it out. So when you're trying to remember something, try to use your visual, taste, auditory, smell, and physical senses. And here's some strategies we can use, and let's keep that in mind when we use these strategies. One especially is this interactive imagery. I tell kids it's like watching TV in your head. Ask them to close their eyes and make images. Ask them to make them moving, colorful, and unusual. Remember, we're trying to get things from the short-term memory into the long-term memory. And to get them up into the neocortex, we need this unusual. And the moving and the colorful adds the other senses into it. So try to have as many of your 5 senses in these images and make them moving, colorful, and unusual. Here's a couple specific strategies we can use the interactive imagery with. One is called the rhyming peg word method. And in this method, you connect what you're trying to remember to these words here. And they rhyme with 1 bun, 2 shoe. So if I'm trying to remember a grocery list, I might remember the laundry detergent and connect a picture of the laundry detergent with the bun. I'm going to make the picture moving, colorful, and unusual. Try to make as many senses as possible. So I might imagine myself pouring the laundry detergent over the bun and bun becoming very soggy. That's an example of what I might do for that. There's a video about this that I'd like you to watch, and you can look at that in more detail. Now, another strategy that's very similar is called the familiar place framework. In this one, you can pick any place. It could be a bedroom, it could be your way to work, it could be your house, it could be a hockey rink, whatever you want. You pick a place and then take the things that you want to remember and place them around the room. So I might place the laundry detergent on the nightstand, and the bread on my bed, and the milk on on this little nightstand, just around the room. But each one of these placements needs to be moving, colorful, and unusual. So maybe the bread is dancing on the bed and jumping up and down. That's kind of unusual, and it's moving. And you can imagine the color that the bread is. So that's another one, the rhyming peg word method, the familiar place method. Here's another strategy that you may have used when you're remembering those 30 items, and that is creating a story. So take the items that you want to remember and link them in a story. Then when you remember the story, you remember the items. The The last strategy I'm going to share with you is called memory flashing. And this is the most powerful. This strategy I've used with students, and I've had students come up to me and hug me in the hall because they've never passed the test before they use this strategy. So in this strategy, we're going to combine the 1-1-1-1 review strategy with using a graphic organizer. And this involves the chunking or the categorizing. So the first thing you do is organize your notes into a graphic organizer, and then study them carefully. Then you cover up your notes and recreate that graphic organizer from memory, and compare your earlier notes with your new notes and add anything that you forgot. Now you do this again an hour later, and then 1 day later. When the students come into the classroom the next day, you do it again. Then 1 week later. If the test hasn't already happened, do it 1 month later. Even if the test already happened, try it 1 month later. It will help them remember it for a longer period of time. So let's see an example. Here's some of the things that I talked about in this screencast so far. And look, it's already put in a graphic organizer. So if we look at here, we talked about short-term memory, and there's 7 to 9 items in your short-term memory, and you can hold an item there for 3 to 18 seconds before you decide to remember. We also talked about the brain and the limbic system, and how the limbic system has to do with emotions, and it controls your attention, and it needs to feel safe. And this is your short-term memory. We talked about the neocortex, and how the neocortex really likes novelty, and this is where the higher cognitive functions are happening, and it's your long-term memory. We talked about strategies like creating a story, using the familiar place framework, chunking or categorizing the information. We talked about the rhyming pegword method, the memory flashing that we're practicing right now, the 1-1-1-1 strategy for review. We also talked about visual imagery and making those images moving, colorful, and unusual, and using all of your senses. So if you take this graphic organizer and go through what I just did, talking through each one of the points, then hide this, take out a piece of paper, and try to recreate this graphic organizer. When you've done all that you can, then revisit this graphic organizer and see what you forgot. Add in the things that you forgot, and about an hour later, it doesn't have to be exactly an hour later, it can be later in the day, but sometime today, then recreate this, do this again, look at the mind map, study it, go through it, talk yourself through it, and then try to recreate it. This time you'll remember more things that you remembered before. Then try to do it the next day. We'll talk about this some more, but this strategy really works. If you do it the next day and the next week, you'll remember all this information. So those are all different memory strategies and things that you can teach your students so they can be better students. The next screencast is going to be specifically on graphic organizers and resources that you can use for graphic organizers.